Welcome to episode 16 in the KIPS Personal Trainer Application Podcast. My name is Tyler Valencia, and I'm the president of KIPS and Kettlebell Concepts. In this episode, we have our first equipment manufacturer. Chris Severs is the owner and developer of Anchor Point Training. Throughout this episode, Chris shares his insight on anchored resistance training and how to utilize his tool. Also, he dives into the benefits of utilizing bands and other suspension training tools. Let's get to the episode. How does the Anchor Point training system differ from suspension training devices out there?
Good question. First of all, Anchor Point training as an approach to training really applies, the education paradigm applies to any anchor tool. Mm-hmm. So that is any suspension strap, any cable machine, anchored resistance band mine, even a sled, a battle rope. Those are all anchored tools, and they basically, they all have, there's three connections that are in common with all of these tools, right? When I came to Anchor Point training, I started I designed an anchor system. It's the first sort of piece of equipment that I designed. Mm-hmm. And over a period of years, I decided that I would design the tools that I wanted to use with this anchor system, because I didn't see any tools out there in the bands and the suspension world particularly. I thought there were some great innovations yet to come for those types of tools. Mm-hmm. So it's a long answer to a short question. I'll say this, as I will describe to you how our suspension design is different from a TRX.
Yeah.
But let me say first that anytime you are training with an anchored tool, you get to manage three connections that are external to your body, that are always implicated. They're always part of the summation of forces as you work with resistance through any range of motion. Mm-hmm. So those three connections are the anchor point. That's the beginning of the vector of resistance. Think about it in terms of a suspension strap. If you had an overhead anchor or a wall anchor, for example, there would be different things you'd be able to do. If you had a band, if you had a high anchor versus a low anchor, there would be different things that you would be able to do. So understanding the tool you're using and how different anchor points are going to affect how you can use that tool and the resistance forces you can work with, that's the first connection to manage. The second connection is how you're actually connected to the tool. Is it a handle? Is it a strap on your body, a strap on your wrist? How thick is the handle? How you're connected to the tool makes a significant difference to how you're going to be able to work with that tool and the summation of forces you're going to create in any exercise. The third connection is your connection to the ground. So your orientation to the anchor, are you static stance? Are you moving? What is the stance? What's the footing? Is it grippy? Is it slippery? Are you barefoot? Are you not? All of those things are basically, all those elements are elements that you get to work with as a trainer. And either in some cases, you've got to say, okay, I've only got a low anchor to work with. What can I do with this? Or, I've got a constraint here. I've only got so much space to work, or this is the footing I'm working with. So being able to understand the approach to training with anchored resistance from the perspective of those three connections is going to now open up a lot of the options that you can and programming that you can create and give you a better understanding of how to manage any anchored tool. So specifically, the TRX. So the TRX has a design feature called the locking loop. It's a limited slip at the anchor, right? That limited amount of slip forces you to be bilateral, right? So it's sort of like working with a barbell. It's a suspension tool that is a lot like working with a barbell, because you've got to manage that instability, right? That slipping. Mm-hmm. Now, the original TRX, by the way, didn't have the locking loop, but nope. They found that people would sometimes overcommit to one handle or the other, and they'd go down, right? Made it a little more dangerous. So that's why they developed the locking loop. Other developers, CrossCore for one, there's a couple of other models out there, I think, that have the RIP 60. has a fully reciprocating feature. Boy, the fully reciprocating feature is a great thing, but it's a little dangerous. But it opens up the tool again, forcing you to be bilateral. Or if you're working with the reciprocation, you're going to be working with that. Now, anchor point training design, the straps are fixed. There are several designs in the market that are like that. The original suspension trainer, which was the Jungle Gym, is like that. For example, although they have two separate anchor points as opposed to a single anchor point. Changes up the lines of pull a bit. Useful. The most useful thing about being able to having stable anchored straps, is that you can transfer your weight from hand to hand, right? Sort of like rings. So when you have a suspension tool where you can leverage body weight and you can transfer your weight from hand to hand, that opens up a massive vocabulary of possibilities that you can't do if you're being forced to be bilateral with the tool because it slips, right? So that's a fundamental difference. People often look at us, oh yeah, that's the TRX. TRX has become like Kleenex. It's like become the generic sort of term for a suspension trainer. And that's just really, if that's what you think, then you really, you don't fully understand, the physics of training with suspended resistance. The beautiful thing, most beautiful thing about suspension training is that you can take all the vocabulary of calisthenics move, body weight moves, and you can put somebody who has very limited amount of strength, and you can get them into all kinds of angles of work, fly angles and things like that, because they can transfer weight from hand to hand. They can work unilaterally, right? This also means you can create a lot of different lunging patterns and working with the suspension strap in a lot of different ways, where you're, pulling yourself up with one hand, lunging to another position, pulling yourself up with your other hand, and the straps are stable. So it's more of a movement-based vocabulary of exercises. I would say from that perspective, the anchor point training suspension strap is more like a dumbbell, and the TRX is more like a barbell. They're both useful tools, right?
Yeah.
But frankly, the dumbbell is more versatile than the barbell, period, full stop. It just is. So there you go. The other aspect of the anchor point training suspension strap that is unique from any other suspension strap in the market is the handle design, how you connect with the resistance. And that's been most of the design designs I've created to do with anchored resistance with the bands and the suspension strap have focused around how do I make the connection to the resistance more useful. So double wide handle that we have with our anchor strap, with our suspension strap, first of all, you can use it two hands, right? Pretty cool. You can do closed grip work, closed grip curls, closed grip tricep presses. You can do rotational work where you're working both hands on the handle together. The other aspect of the design is this handle is on a very long loop. So when you're doing, for example, your presses, there is no rub on your arms from the strap. The straps are very soft nylon, so if they do rub on your shoulder or whatever, it's very comfortable. But it allows you to also get your hands and you're right inside the straps, so it's very, very stable and very comfortable. The thing about that design is you can slide our handle around on this long loop so that you can hold it lengthwise. So when you're holding this handle lengthwise, now you can train grip strength. If you want to use it with asymmetric force at the handle, then you can train wrist strength as well. You can train your wrists, right? Where you've got, imagine like a small rip trainer, and all of a sudden you've got, resistance on one end of the handle. There's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with that for strengthening wrists. So our tool has been really well appreciated in particularly the active age world, the rehab world. We've sold a lot to boot camps as well.
Yeah.
So the main difference is how it's anchored, the connection. Oh yeah, and it's half the price. Did I mention that? It's half the price.
What I liked a lot in the development of I'll say this podcast was, I went on your YouTube, which I shared with you prior to recording, and I saw a lot of great videos on there that you had done with somebody from the Functional Aging Institute. And you guys were talking about how the application goes to the senior population, the active aging. And one of the more fascinating ones I saw was you guys were breaking down how it could be adjusted to go around the waist, which is something that, I mean, one, if you're thinking suspension training, how are you going to get around somebody's waist? But just the ways that you guys could modify this to be almost a force from the waist, and then doing different types of walking drills, which is very big within the active aging population. Fall prevention is very big. So the ways that you guys can
Yeah.
utilize this modality, it's amazing. And I appreciate you kind of painting a picture of how yours is different, because that might be someone that's listening right now. They might be like, well, how is it different? Where can I use this?
Yeah.
And things like that. And I think it opens up the possibilities when you're comparing, like you mentioned before, yours is more like a dumbbell compared to a barbell. It's not apples to apples, even though they might be in a similar space. The applications open up, which is great for your, with your anchor point training tool.
Yeah, thank you. Here's the thing, what you saw with Dan, like what you're referring there. So
Mm-hmm.
there's two sort of components to anchor point training. There is we have designed an anchor system, which I hope to be back on the market with one of these days. They're very expensive to make. It's about
Mm-hmm.
a $20,000 investment to make a production run.
Whoa.
So it's chunky, right? And to be, I'm a small, a company, basically a designer, right? And that is where I've been putting my efforts. As now we're of course on the cusp of scaling into the consumer market because of these difficult days. But that's quite interesting. The tool I'm designing with the suspension strap, right? That's rigid, fixed, leveraged body weight work. The other tool that we have that we've designed is a resistance bands tool. And the video you saw with functional aging was actually an earlier version of a design. I've got a design out recently, about 6 months ago, came out with it's a 3.5-inch wide elastic webbing band. It's got a handle in the middle of it. And that webbing band, you can use it as a waist strap. You can use it as a harness over your shoulders. You can move resistance through different ranges of motion. What I like about it as a complement to the suspension is, if you like in my typical practice, Tyler, I'll do 10 exercises with the suspension strap. And then I'll do 10 exercises with the resistance band. I'll do about 20. My protocol is about a 20 rep protocol. So it's a 400 rep workout. It takes probably half an hour. It's a great full body workout, right? And just loads of variety. The whole time you're training standing on your feet. But, if I'm doing for example, a planked push-up, right, with a suspension strap, or taking that same suspension strap and doing a push-up with an alternate front lunge, I can take a press with the band, right? With a bilateral press with an alternate front lunge. Very similar range of motion, almost identical really, but the forces are different. Because in one case I'm dealing with gravity, it's consistent. In the other case I'm dealing with a resistance band where the force increases as I push away from the anchor and comes back. So again, that basically elicits a whole other adaptation response, whether it's neurologically, whether it's just in terms of working the muscles differently. That's useful variety. So that's part of my approach to practice in the overall is how do we find ways to create a lot of variety that is progressive, rather than just doing lots of endless reps.
Yeah. And I think what you've kind of hinted at so far is the uses of yours and how it applies to different populations, not to talk negatively about TRX or any type of other suspension training company, but yours can utilize, so people are probably familiar with the TRX suspension straps. They're also probably familiar with the ripstick, or I forgot the other ones
Hmm.
out there that have a similar name. But you can essentially
Hmm.
accommodate those exercises with your tool. You're not having to purchase another, I'm not going to call them extra expensive, but another expensive tool
Hmm.
to perform
Yeah.
similar exercises. So the uses just open up. And then for personal trainers, for them to then take this tool, it opens it up for multiple populations. I know that we've kind of focused so far on the active aging population, but I personally, when I utilize the rip trainer, when I was introduced to it roughly, I'll say 2.5 years ago, I finally came across a gym that I was at that had it. I love the application to athletic performance for it. And
Yeah.
so that ability to cross multiple populations just opens up the door, like you've mentioned, for programming. And I think that that is somewhere that trainers can utilize this one tool. But I know that you and I talked about before with the uses within either the boot camp setting, group setting, or even the one-on-one setting.
Yes, Tyler, you've got it. The idea that attracted to me to sort of investing myself in anchored resistance 10 years ago, I was an aging athlete, a rugby player,
Mm.
and I needed to train more athletically. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't need strength. I needed to maintain athleticism and quickness. And I found, for example, resistance bands particularly were very, very useful for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of how I started working with anchored tools. And then I got encouraged by other trainers who said, boy, you're doing some really interesting things. And I realized I had a bit of a talent for it. And then I decided I wanted to go deep on it. And it was at a time in my life, my kids were all grown up. I had a business. I sold that business, moved to Southern California and said, you know what, I'm going to do this. And that was about 10 years ago. And it's been a pretty interesting time ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the thing that really got me into, it really drove me, if you will, inspired me, was I realized that that training with anchored, the tools are very simple, and you can train anywhere. You can train in a gym. You can train on the
Yes.
beach. You can train in a park. You can train in your backyard. You can train in your home. So it was basically a knowledge-based approach to training that didn't require really a lot of expensive equipment. What it required was good education, good know-how. But boy, I tell you, particularly the bands, when I first started working with bands, I would just, the quality of the gear just made me sick.
Mm-hmm.
I was just so, if you're going to train with that type of gear all the time, it's like, look, surely somebody could make something better, that wasn't going to break and maybe take out my eye or whatever. So I went out and bought my first gym space that I owned when I was really developing my ideas early in the going. I bought a bunch of gear from a company called Slastics. And shortly after working with them, I asked them if they would design some longer bands for me. I explained to them that I found that the longer band had a more gradual change in resistance and was going to be more useful for the type of athletic training I wanted to do. Anyway, and I designed an anchor system specifically for this type of band. Anyway, they did it, bless them. And I decided, hey, this is fun. I'm going to get into the market and do this myself. I went to my first trade show to present the ARC to people in the industry, and saw that all my ideas were now being sold by Slastics.
Oh.
All right. So now, look, that's totally cool. There was nothing patentable about any of these ideas. They were inspired by what I was doing, and they realized, boy, this is a whole new category of product for us. So they went out and did it. It would have been nice to have got a few props along the way, but over the last number of years, I can tell you there's a half a dozen inventions out there that have emulated one aspect or another of design ideas that I've come up with. That's just the nature of business,
Mm-hmm.
If you have something that's totally unique and you can patent it, great. But at the end of the day, I'm not finished with upgrading and developing the tools. That's just the thing I'm doing and what I love to do. But yeah, so there you go. that was part of the journey in the early days.
Hmm.
Was sort of learning that part as well. It's as a tool developer, right? It's pretty nitty gritty at times.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very competitive world out there. My sense is, look, if I want to be a developer, if I really want to be the go-to person for training, education, and designing anchor point training tools, then I've got to continue to evolve designs and work like that. I've got a couple of pieces in work right now that are really next level ideas for suspension training. I've got a handle in work right now that basically it amplifies the neurological input, right? It's designed, it's a material, a patented material that basically amplifies the sensation of, you have on the palms of your hands, on the soles of your feet, you have organs, sensory organs
Hmm.
that, 4 different types of sensory organs that basically tell your brain, okay, they sense pressure, they sense skin spread, they sense heat, they sense movement. So this material basically amplifies the connection, the connectivity, how your hands experience and feel the, right. Uh, it's a fascinating aspect of connection for
Yeah.
neurological training. We've had prototypes out to people that are training in the medical fitness world. So training people that are recovering from stroke, people with Parkinson's, people with MS, people with ataxia, and they've had already remarkable results because now these people are feeling their hands
Hmm.
better. And when that grip is better felt through the chain, basically what happens is that signal is a stronger signal into the brain, which then produces a stronger signal to the muscles and a stronger movement. So it's basically amplify the signal, amplify the movement. We're
Awesome
going
stuff.
to see if there aren't some performance aspects to this as well.
Yeah.
You think about performance. Think about like when you're running in a pair of cleats and you've got really good grip, right? And your body feels you've got grip, or you're picking up a bar, and your hands are chopped, and you've got better grip. There is something in your brain, right, that will tell you that, oh, you're safer now. You've got
Yep.
stronger grip, and your brain will give you the power. You don't get 100% of the power that you've got in your body. Your brain is always governing the amount of strength and force it's going to give you because it doesn't want you to injure yourself, right?
Hmm.
If you send the brain the signal that it's got more stability, the brain will give you more force. Could be. We're going to see going forward whether or not this tech actually has some performance advantages. But the fact that it's already showing tremendous promise working with people who have neurological deficits is super encouraging. So yeah, you'll see that tool is basically, we're going to launch a pre-sale for that tool in June.
Very fascinating.
But there you go. First time I do this. First time I actually telling the world about it, brother.
I dig it. I
So
dig
there
it.
you go.
On our podcast. That's great. Very,
Yeah, it's sort of cool, right?
yeah, very
I've been
fascinating.
cool.
And I kind of want to go back to what you touched on at the beginning when you're talking about the utilization in the park, on the beach, in your home. What kind of sparked my interest in your tool was I've seen you do it in your house. I think that's where you film quite a bit of your videos that you're putting out on social media. And then when I went on your YouTube, I saw the utilization inside a gym, on the beach. So the application to take it wherever you're training your clients, or if you're in a group setting, it's out there. And what I think might help some of the listeners right now is kind of if you shared some of your favorite exercises, maybe I'll say 4 of your favorite exercises, and maybe try to vary its utilization, because I think that is also something great. I just saw on your YouTube channel just so many different ways that you can maneuver, or you can switch up how you want to utilize your tool.
it really is incredible, the variety. I do a 4-hour workshop, and I've been blessed to have traveled to close to 35 states in the last 3 years,
Wow.
doing workshops all around, doing live workshops. It's 4 hours, and I just brain dump on people on variations and progressions for bands and suspension, particularly, while giving them the general overview. And I say to them at the beginning of every class, at the end of this class, you will show me something that I have never seen before with these tools. And it's always true. In fact, it's usually true with several things. So the idea is to understand the principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you understand the principles, then it's basically, look, I'm going to give you the alphabet, and even some words, but ultimately you're going to write your own words, and you're definitely going to write your own stories. Or it's like music, because it's only 12 notes. Right. But, you've got timing, it's where you put the notes that matters. So my general approach, I'll give you my workout. Here's my typical workout.
Nice.
All right. So if I'm starting with my resistance bands, I'm going to do a set of bilateral presses with an alternate front lunge. And then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to do a set of bilateral rows with an alternate back lunge.
Mm-hmm.
Then my next set, I'm going to go and I'm going to do an ipsilateral lunge press. So I'm going to press and lunge the same side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alternately, right? So left foot forward, left hand forward, right foot forward. I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to do an ipsilateral row back lunge, right? And I'm going to do that, basically. And when I do that, I open up the stance a little bit and sort of pull it across my body. My third superset, if you will, I'm now going to do a contralateral press lunge. I'm going to press right, lunge left, right? And then I'm going to do the same thing with the row, which is, by the way, a little more challenging for your balance, surprisingly, a contralateral row with a lunge. I'm rowing left and I'm lunging right,
Mm-hmm.
for example. Now, as I'm doing those, that's basically 6 exercises supersetted, right? 3 presses, 3 rows. But I've done them because I've done them in a different pattern. This is already more interesting work neurologically, right? So more new movement patterns create basically a neural pathway in your brain. As you repeat the pattern, that pathway becomes insulated. It's called myelination.
Mm-hmm.
The more movement patterns you master, the more neural pathways you have in your white matter. This makes for denser white matter. Basically, it's a preventative. It just means you're basically probably going to lose your shit a little slower than most people as you get older. It basically is a stronger brain. So having a fitness practice, to my mind, isn't just about breaking muscle and buffing up. It's not even about necessarily being able to jump higher or run faster. It really is about, how do I train myself completely? So that little idea there is of just you working contralateral and unilateral and bilateral patterns is already getting you sort of down that road. Now, the thing about that work is I can do those reps. Also, I can do them very, very slowly, really accentuate and max out, to try and get close to my max resistance as I'm doing the press. Or I can do them very quickly and amplify the work rate, amplify the cardio aspect of that as well. So I have that sort of versatility as well in that, and I'm standing on my feet the whole time. So that little complex there, think about it. You've got ground forces on your feet, translating through your legs, through your core, through your chest, through your back as you are working. If I change the anchor point for that, like imagine if I've got a low anchor point and I'm doing that row with the alternate lunge, I'm basically pressing up at about a 45-degree angle, right? It's almost an overhead press, but not quite, right?
Mm-hmm.
I take that same idea from a high anchor. So like this morning, I trained from a low anchor. Tomorrow I'll go out and I'll hook I'll probably do that same routine and I'll stick it on, I'll put the anchor at a high anchor. Now I'm pressing down, hitting a whole different angles, or rowing down. I'm hitting whole different angles in my back and my chest, working differently. So again, a little more adaptation response, a little more global irradiation of musculature as well. So that's press pull ideas, right? Arms, right? So a couple of different notions for arms. I'll tell you. So biceps curls. One of the coolest things about bands is it's really easy to create a negative with a biceps curls.
Mm-hmm.
You curl up, right? So you get a heavy enough band, you curl up, right? And now you've locked in at the top end of your curl where you're strongest, right? And then you just simply walk back, move yourself back away from the anchor, and then release past your 1 rep max capability on the curl, on the concentric. But you've got, and then you handle it, and then you basically let the resistance go back slowly on the eccentric. It's a pretty interesting way to create eccentric work with a band for a curl, right?
Definitely.
You do it all by yourself. If I take that same idea, right, I'm facing the anchor and I'm doing a bilateral curl. If I angle myself so that I'm not square onto the anchor, maybe I'm 45 degrees with 1 foot slightly ahead, and I try that same work, totally different forces through my core,
Mm-hmm.
through my shoulders, through my arms, even ground forces. So lots of different ways you can change stance, right? Same range of motion with that curl, right? I could do that same curl. Oh, I could add squats to it. I could add alternate back lunges to it. So now I'm taking a simple arm exercise, which I will say, look, if you're just standing doing curls, oh boy, if you've got all the time in the world to train, then fine, go ahead and do it. But if you really, want to get most bang for your buck for the amount of time you're spending training, doing a curling exercise that you can also add a squat to, or a back lunge, or a side lunge, or some other movement to, it's higher value work.
Yep.
Right. So there you go. So there's a couple of ideas on the anchor point world. But yeah, I encourage folks to, whether you're using our gear or not, if you go to the Facebook Anchor Point training page or the Instagram, I'm now starting to put a lot of stuff up on Instagram, Anchor Point training. There's just loads and loads and loads of ideas that you can use pretty much with any band or any suspension strap. You'll see there's some things that are quite specific to our tools, but it's the ideas are there. And sort of once people get into it, they're open to it, then they realize, oh, really? Yeah, they see it. It's a matter of sort of giving them that broader perspective.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And what is kind of fascinating, and I would say this about even just the quality of guests that come on the podcast, but then also what they share. There's always some tidbits that kind of cross over. Just yesterday, we had a recording with Dr. Tony Nunez, who was talking about circuit training. And one of the big points that came up was the application with clients and how it's something that is enjoyable for them. And we talked about how with training specifically, if you were just doing your favorite exercises, and we got to understand that clients don't always have those same shared feelings towards certain exercises, but here is an application with your anchored resistance training that is fun. It's different, and it's engage them in a different way. I mean, throughout this episode, you've talked many times about the brain training involved in utilizing this tool. But now we're talking about how you can switch it up, the same exercises, how we can switch up a bicep curl, how we can switch up a press, all these different items inside of one tool. And this is ways that this can open up essentially your client's eyes to, wow, that was different than what I'm used to. You're showing them something, you're showing value to your clients in a different way. And so I like how you mentioned these exercises, because already there, you're starting to see the differences, how you can apply similar programming techniques with them within a similar week. Okay, I'm going to change the anchor. I'm going to move it from a high to a low. And just right there, you've already opened up the possibilities, which is great to see. Something that is new for this podcast is you're actually the first inventor to come on the podcast. So with that, it's great to take this opportunity to even talk about, because there might be other fitness professionals out there looking at, okay, I want to invent something, or I want to develop a product and get it out on the market. Okay, what are those steps? So that's the beauty of the fitness industry. There's different levels, there's different professions, there's different opportunities. Can you share with us, and this is our podcast takeaway for this episode, can you share with us 3 struggles that you encountered when getting your product off the ground?
Wow. Well, I guess the single biggest struggle is the fitness industry itself, right?
Nice. Mm-hmm.
Fitness industry itself, it's a lot like the food industry, right? It's a triumph of good marketing over quality. I mean, in the food industry, there's a lot of fast food. There's a lot of unhealthy food. In the
Yeah.
fitness industry, there's a lot of unhealthy fitness.
Yeah.
So, if so you've got a lot of forces out there, established practices, established approaches, that are very resistant to progressive training. I mean, how often do you hear about functional training being referred to with a bit of a sneer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you basically, you've got a lot of entrenched attitudes
Mm-hmm.
in the fitness industry. A lot of people, let's face it, have been successful doing something, and they're going to dance with the girl that they brung. I mean, they're going to teach people what they know, what they're successful with. It doesn't mean necessarily it's best practice. Getting people who are already personally invested in certain approaches, to open up their perspective to see something that might work better isn't as easy as you would think.
Yeah.
So be realistic about how you're going to convince people to adopt what you're doing. Definitely be solving a specific problem,
Mm-hmm.
and understand who is going to benefit from that problem. Intellectual property, if you can get it, great. It's quite a process to do, but depending on if you want to develop an idea or a design and then license it to somebody else, because you're not interested in doing any of the marketing and building a company or doing any of that, then intellectual property is absolutely fundamental. There's no way you're going anywhere unless you have it, because
Mm-hmm.
this industry will simply take your idea and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
They just will.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of it. Most industries like that. Fitness industry is particularly like that, but all industries are like that. I spent a lot of years in textiles, and people just knock people off all the time. It's just business, nothing personal.
Yeah.
Somebody likes your idea and they don't have to pay you for it, they won't. Boy, the other thing I will say is really understand that to make an impact, you're going to need to cover off the education aspect of how the tool's used.
Mm-hmm.
So figure out, who's going to present your education, how you're going to do it. If you can get a certification, do it. Get it certified. We have an accredited certification for anchor point training that, like I said, it's generic. It's not about our specific tools. It basically talks in depth about managing those 3 connections that I mentioned to you at the beginning of the podcast. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's a systemized way to basically look at those connections. And then once you understand that and how broad each of those elements can be, then you can put them together with any anchor tool. So there you go. And there are a lot of great progressive people out there. Find them, connect with them. I mean, a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, I knew nobody in the industry, and it's a small industry, really.
Yeah.
And even though it's a big industry, but the people who are getting stuff done, the developers, the inventors, the thinkers, those people are pretty easy to connect with on social, and you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
And engage in the process. It is a process.
Oh, yeah.
It's a process.
I think you hit on something that many fitness pros will think about more. And really, with the invention of your product, you learned about it, you developed it, and you're getting it out there and taking advantage of the opportunities in front of you. I mean, with the anchor point training strap. And I like how you talked about the educational component, not just because KIPS is an educational company, but because of the fact that it comes across throughout this whole podcast episode how important the educational component is. Understanding how you can utilize the tool and then its application, how you can modify, all those things come across when you were talking throughout this episode, which is great. You're coming from it from the educational standpoint, and I think many fitness professionals appreciate that, but then understand the value of it. You're not just getting the next tool because it's fancy, because it's fun to play with. You want to learn more about it so that you can apply it better and then ultimately build your business. I think that was actually something in a recent episode. I talked with a guest about different, I don't want to call them lies. That's been a question that's been coming up, but we call it like the podcast takeaways, the different lies within the industry. And one of them was essentially talking about how you can create your selling profile or the business end of it. And if you come from a place where you're educating, you could still make it in the industry. I think some trainers, they think that they got to get the fancy tools. They got to get all this fancy stuff because they're going to all of a sudden sell so much training packages, so much, they're all to be raking it in. But really the foundation education just sets you up, so I really appreciate you taking that time and breaking each one of these down in terms of how you can utilize it, why it's important, and then its application, because I think that really sets a great foundation for personal trainers.
Oh, thanks, man.
Oh yeah.
Listen, I'm grinding on this, and I'm trying to get better at it all the time.
Yeah.
And I love it. I really do. That's what's kept me in the game. I think fact is fitness practice and better practice is important. It really is. And, and I think we've got a ways to go yet to bring people to the point where they have best practice, something that's enjoyable, convenient, that serves all their needs, not just their physical needs, but their mental and even their emotional needs. Being able to train in a nice place, like man, when I get up and can go out to the beach to train and hook my gear up to a lifeguard station or go to a park and train, in nature, boy, that's a wonderful way to work out. Let me tell you, So yeah, I'm very grateful for that. I really
all good stuff. All good stuff. Chris, can you share with us I know that this is a different time for us within the industry and the country, but can you share potentially any upcoming events? Do you have anything on the calendar right now?
Boy, I interview inventors once a week on a Friday and drop those videos. I've had a whole dance card lined up for the fall, for the summer. Normally by this time of the year, I've done at least 2 road trips. Haven't done any this year. Who knows, right? Like, when are we going to be back out on the, in doing trade shows and stuff like that? I've got this great tool coming out in June, which is, if any of you folks are training people that have neurological deficits, anything to do with stroke or Parkinson's or anything like that, definitely shoot me a message. I'm going to do a limited run on a pre-sale in June of this new handle design. It's pretty cool stuff. And as we go, I mean, our program here is now we're all of a sudden much more engaged in our program into the home market. And what we want to do is offer personal online training to clients who have our gear at home. So rather than just sending them videos and stuff like that, what I see happening is that people are now more comfortable talking on Zoom and getting their information that way, and getting trained that way. And trainers are now much more capable of delivering that type of training as well. So I'm hopeful that as we build out our home training program, that we connect with a network of trainers who get certified at Anchor Point and are going to be delivering that type of training online. So yeah, that's what's really on my dance card right now, is trying to figure out how we go to the home market with integrity, where we can get people, if somebody's had a knee replacement, we can hook them up with a trainer that, does knee replacement rehab.
Nice.
If somebody's a golfer, we can hook them up with a trainer that trains golfers.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's sort of our push right now in terms of going to market.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And one more time, can you share your social media profiles, Facebook, YouTube, and also Instagram,
Sure.
just the handles for them?
Yeah, for sure. Just Anchor Point Training. You enter that into your Google search and you'll see our Facebook page. You'll see our YouTube channel. Instagram is Anchor Point 2. There are videos going back 10 years there, man. There are so many ideas there. It's ridiculous.
Really good stuff.
And there's workouts. There's a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And we continue to produce and tune and get it dialed in,
On the right track. I loved it. And so, Chris, thank you for coming on the KIPS Personal Trainer Application Podcast. Shared a lot of great gems in terms of ways to apply this information, and really came from the viewpoint of education. So I appreciate you coming on.
Brother, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.